Welcome to tonight's edition of the One Hood Power Hour. We have another incredible show tonight. I am your co-host, Kahari Mosley, here with my illustrious team, my co-hosts, Miracle Jones and Ryan White. And tonight we are going to be talking about building movements in the time of COVID. As we know, COVID-19 has exposed and expanded racial inequities in education, health, and the workforce. And although the virus impacts everyone, we know Black and Brown and Indigenous communities have been hit the hardest due to ongoing injustices. So today we are going to be talking to three activists who are building movements in the time of COVID. We have Dakota Castro-Jarrett from Stop the Station. We have María del Rosario Palacios from Georgia Familias Unidas, the acting executive director, as well as Nino Brown, a representative of the Boston Teachers Union, who will be talking all about in their respective work how they are building movements in the time of COVID. So before we get to our illustrious guests, again, so much to talk about in the political front. So let's start with Miracle. What has been on your mind this past week, and what is something that we should be paying attention to?
Just as election 2020 has wrapped up, election 2021 has taken off. Races up ballot, down ballot are becoming super competitive. Almost every race is now contested. We have judicial elections. But one of the biggest announcements was this past weekend when State Rep Malcolm Kenyatta announced his bid for the Senate seat. He'll be running against the current Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. If Representative Kenyatta wins, he will not only be one of the first openly LGBT individuals who take office representing Pennsylvania, one of the youngest and actually the first Black person as well in the role. So there's a lot of stuff going on. We've had people announcing for school board, people announcing for judgeship, people announcing for city and county council. And it's going to be a very interesting race that I know a lot of people were exhausted from the past election, but all politics is local. And with that, tomorrow, our local county council, they're going to be introducing the legislation that is going to potentially allow for the first time in Allegheny County a police civilian review board that would mirror the city legislation that would require officers to go before the county review board when they've been accused of misconduct or involved in use of force complaints or in a situation where they have taken somebody's life through deadly force. And so that's some of the things that are happening on the local front that it's really going to be very interesting to see how these develop in the next coming days.
Absolutely, yeah. And as you said, on the local front, we are seeing more and more candidates jumping into the fold. As of last Tuesday was the first day to circulate petitions in the state of Pennsylvania. So there's many, many candidates throughout the state, and particularly here in Western Pennsylvania, who are circulating those petitions. And once those get turned in, 2 weeks from tomorrow, we will have a much better idea of who will be running and who will be on the ballot in May. But Ryan, tell us what you've been following in your world.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kahari. So as y'all both mentioned, as a bunch of different candidates have started collecting petitions for their, respective races, APA and all the other organizations that worked on those ballot measures finished collecting petitions within the last week for the two ballot measures that would, greatly restrict solitary confinement in Allegheny County and pass Breonna's Law in Pittsburgh. So that's been a really big deal. The numbers that have come out of that have looked really solid. Obviously, there are still going to be, some court disputes, almost definitely, trying to combat some of those signatures. But given the numbers that they've got, everything looks really good there. So that's some really positive news. We also have some Senate confirmation hearings starting this week. including Pennsylvania's own Dr. Rachel Levine, who was the Secretary of Health in PA and is up for Assistant Secretary of Health now for the U.S. Department of Health. So, it'll be really interesting to see how all of that goes. Also, less on a local political front, but I saw earlier today, which has been one of the biggest news stories of today, that Bobby Shmurda is set for a conditional release tomorrow. So that's ending on a positive note there. That's something to be really optimistic about as well.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll add, adding to Pennsylvania politicians being in the news, U.S. Senator Pat Toomey, who voted to convict former President Donald Trump, has been taking a lot of heat from local Republican organizations throughout the state of Pennsylvania. I understand that state Republican officials are meeting to censure Pat Toomey, which is really interesting because, for those who have been following, politics for the last decade or so can remember when Pat Toomey ran as the far-right candidate against then moderate Republican Arlen Specter, back in the day. And to now see, Pat Toomey, who 10, 15 years ago was considered, one of the most conservative, Republicans in Pennsylvania, if not in Congress, through his affiliation with the Club for Growth, is now looked at as a moderate. So you could just see how much of the political landscape has transformed over the last 15, 20 years, where really dyed-in-the-wool, hardcore right conservatives are now being considered, moderates. So I think it's just a really, stark illustration of how polarized, our politics has become when Pat Toomey is considered a moderate in today's political landscape. I just thought it was just such an interesting development.
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, are sitting here really doing a lot of self-reflecting over the past 6 months to a year about the state of our politics and what we've allowed, and how we're going to create new systems of engagement and ways that we're going to be able to hold politicians accountable in and outside of these systems. The fact that we talked about cancel culture and free speech, and now we're censuring an elected official, it really goes to show how interesting things are going to be happening. And also, along these whole entire lines, the Supreme Court just said that they're not going to hear the challenge raised by Pennsylvania Republicans about the election. So it seems that for all intents and purposes, all challenges about the free and fair question of the free and fair election, and questions surrounding whether or not Biden is the actual elected president have now ceased. And we're going to be moving on to, unfortunately, a lot of laws that are going to make it harder and more difficult for people to vote. Voter suppression is happening all across the nation. We have, whether it's in Pennsylvania, Arizona, or Georgia, legislation coming up that's going to make it more difficult for people to use absentee ballot, more difficult for people to do early voting. So it's very strenuous times that we are living in. And even though the censure vote is about to happen, and even though the Supreme Court has made its final rulings, the questions surrounding the last election cycle are still going to show up for the next few years.
Absolutely. And just the last thing I'll add, with all of, the controversy that has surrounded, the Pennsylvania, Republican Party, the Philadelphia Inquirer just put out a story that said nearly 20,000 Republicans have left the Republican Party as far as registered Republicans in the state of Pennsylvania. And the last thing that I'll say, before we move on in the show, is a local Republican leader, went viral late last week. Dave Ball, who is the chairman of the Washington County Republican Party, which is just south of us, for those who are familiar with Western PA geography. And he made himself famous on CNN last week when he made comments about Senator Toomey, saying, we did not send him to the Senate to vote his conscience or do the right thing. we sent him to do what we want him to do. And that, that went viral. That was on CNN, and it's been played ad nauseum for the last several days. But I think, again, we talk about where we are at, in politics, and this is a local leader from Peters Township, obviously not too far from your neck of the woods, Ryan. I know you're very familiar with Peters Township.
Right down the street. Yep, borders. Borders where I'm at. Lovely.
So Dave Ball, man, definitely one of the more famous Republican chairmen anywhere in the country right now. So Miracle, do you want to talk a little bit more in detail about our show tonight and what our viewers can expect?
Yes, so we're doing this show talking about the way Black and Brown people are organizing and mobilizing, because we understand that electoral politics is not the end all or be all, and that the elections do not save us. And so over the past 6 months, there's been a lot of discussion of how horrible COVID-19 has basically ravaged Black and Brown communities. And in our everyday lives, a lot of Black and Brown people are still dealing with the pandemic of racism, the pandemic of xenophobia, the pandemic of COVID-19. We have a housing crisis, a looming housing crisis, and different things. And so people are finding various ways to organize and to mobilize. And we're going to start locally with Stop the Station, because just this past Saturday, they were able to have a conference on safety and community. And there were hundreds of people who were involved in the Saturday conference that came together to kind of think about ways in which we can keep each other safe going forward. There's been a lot of issues like here in Allegheny County around police violence, community violence. Our region has one of the largest swaths of active white supremacist cells. The Pennsylvania is the second most recognized state for sending people to engage in the Capitol riots. So it's a lot of stuff going on in Pennsylvania, and there's been a lot of police officers who've been arrested as well. And so we're thinking about ways that we can keep each other safe. How do we do that? And so for the first person, we're going to bring in Dakota, who is a youth organizer, a student, and a teen activist who is very active and involved with Stop the Station, which is a local grassroots organization that is organizing to stop the new police station in East Liberty from opening and creating more police. So welcome, Dakota.
Hi, thank you for having me here. So I guess I'll do what I'm supposed to do, which is talk a little bit about Stop the Station. And
we'll just we're doing something new. We're trying to get our ducks in a row. We do have a disclaimer that we're going to just put up just to make sure that people understand that we are a news station and we're here to share information, so we can be more transparent. So we thank all of you hold us to account, and with that, we'll go back to Dakota.
Yeah. So I guess I'd first like to start by going over a little bit of the history of Stop the Station, and then kind of touching on the demands, and then the recent action conference that Miracle just brought up. During the Black Lives Matter movement of last summer in Pittsburgh, Stop the Station Coalition was formed with representatives from several organizations within Pittsburgh, like Penn Plus Support and Action, Pittsburgh Socialist Alternative, which I'm a member of to remove any transparency, Pittsburgh I Can't Breathe, and many more. This coalition was formed in reaction to the, at the time, recent discovery that the city of Pittsburgh had plans to move the Zone 5 police station from its current location on Washington Boulevard in Highland Park back to the location it once had in East Liberty nearly 13 years ago. For those who don't know, East Liberty is a working class Black community on the east end of Pittsburgh. And while many of the community members living there today are a part of that kind of original group of working class Black people, many others had to leave due to the gentrification that community is experiencing, like many other communities within Pittsburgh and across the country. Probably the most egregious example of this gentrification can be seen with what happened to the Penn Plaza building. Penn Plaza was an affordable housing complex, an apartment complex in East Liberty that housed over 200 residents that was demolished despite residents' attempts to protest and take action against this demolition. largely through the formation of the previously mentioned Penn Plaza Support and Action Group. Many of the residents who were evicted from Penn Plaza had to leave East Liberty entirely, and even in some cases Pittsburgh, due to a lack of affordable housing within the city and the surrounding communities. Currently, the lot of Penn Plaza stays mostly empty, except for the most recent construction of an office building, which, if there's anything gentrified communities need more, it's a bunch of office buildings. This history of gentrification in East Liberty is a large reason why Stop the Station rejects the relocation of the Zone 5 police station into East Liberty. Sorry, that's a phone going off in the background. But
No worries.
The 13 years since this police station was in East Liberty, the neighborhood has changed a lot due to this gentrification. We recognize the police within gentrified communities often serve the role of protecting the interests of big businesses and landlords than they do really protecting the interests of the working class people within those communities. After all, when the police are called to handle evictions, who do they side with? Never the tenants and always the landlords. And especially with the brutal role that the police already play in many working class Black communities, Stop the Station agreed that the relocation of this police station served as a major threat to the residents of East Liberty and should be fought against. We set up tables in East Liberty in attempts to gauge community members' perspectives on this relocation, and we were disturbed to find out that the majority of the people we talked to didn't even know that this relocation was happening in the first place. This theme with this lack of transparency from the city government to East Liberty about this project is a reoccurring theme we experience within the struggle, and it's very frustrating. The lack of knowledge within East Liberty about this relocation made Stop the Station come to the realization that some sort of action was needed to raise awareness about what was happening to the Zone 5 police station. So we organized protests, which had hundreds of attendees, formal community meetings where we could discuss topics ranging from the history of struggles in Pittsburgh to ways to organize within communities, and even a socially distanced cookout, all of which helped spread the news about the station to the residents of East Liberty. Despite the growing attention Stop the Station was getting, the city government and Mayor Pedutos continued ignoring our struggle, first by directly lying to us by claiming that this relocation wasn't happening in the first place, but after they realized they could no longer lie to us, they began to give a variety of excuses as to why it was happening. One of these excuses included Peduto shamefully throwing the Zone 5 Citizen Public Safety Council under the bus, claiming that they were pro this move and had pushed for it, when the council itself informed us this was incorrect. While this constant lack of transparency from the city government is very frustrating, it shouldn't be too surprising to us that the same people who benefit most from protecting the interests of big businesses like Google and the gentrifying role they play in these communities are the same people who try to keep these projects hidden from public view. The biggest claim Peduto and the city government, and the city council, made against Stop the Station was that a majority location. Based on the numerous times the city government had lied to us, we decided to take their word for it and instead ask the community members directly about how they feel. So we began to canvass in East Liberty, and pretty soon we had spoken to so many of the East Liberty residents that we even began to move into neighboring communities like Friendship, Garfield, and Larimer. And the results of talking to residents about how they felt about this relocation, something that the city government certainly never did, we found that the majority of the people we talked to, around 70%, did not support this relocation. While canvassing, we also asked community members about our other two demands, both of which were connected to a fight against racist police brutality and gentrification, and both of which got majority support from people we asked. Our second major demand, besides the actual stopping of that relocation of the police station itself, is for defunding the Pittsburgh police by 50%. This 50% number doesn't just come from nowhere, but rather is directly the amount Mayor Peduto has raised the police budget since his time in office, despite the fact that Pittsburgh, like most major American cities, has had decreasing crime rates over the decade. The police budget is incredibly overbloated, and one anecdotal piece of evidence about how overbloated this budget is was shown to me during a protest downtown, when I saw a Port Authority police tank pass by the group of protesters. The fact that the Port Authority police have at least one tank shows how unnecessarily bloated this budget is, and how much of this extra funding goes to paying police ridiculously large salaries and buying weapons to brutalize community members with could go to other things to actually help community members.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to interrupt you. I know you're going on about the work that you're doing. And so at Stop the Station, you guys made a conscious effort to go door to door, to canvas, to talk with folks. And I know you've said that this sometimes for some people it's like the first time that they had heard about the station coming back. How are you following up with those residents that you talk to? How are you letting them know what's going on? Because you do a lot of teach-ins as well.
Yeah, that's definitely been, I think, like a prime issue that we've been trying to handle with, right? Like a lot of the residents, East Liberty are older, lower income Black folk who do not have access, to like regular internet stuff and, stuff like that, and can't, actively participate in a lot of the online meetings we have. And that's definitely been something like that we've been trying to deal with. And I think like you brought it up, like the community meetings are one way in which we've tried to bring residents out to these things, like actually having places where people can go to discuss these ideas. I think is really important and essential, not just because it's good to provide spaces for people to like know about what's happening through their communities, but also because I think it's necessary to join these communities together, get people who have like-minded ideas together so then they can fight for these struggles, right? And I think, like I can't lie, like it's been difficult, especially because of the pandemic. It is hard to like have these outside activities, especially during the winter, because like it's just like insufficient. Most people do not want to go out of their houses, but we did a lot of them earlier in the year, and I really hope, as the fall season's approaching, we are definitely planning to do a lot more. I think that's like one really essential thing that we've been trying to do. I definitely know during our upcoming plans or upcoming kind of commitments, we're going to definitely try to get mailers and stuff like that, which will be, sent out to larger amounts of people, which will hopefully like get to these residents who like do not have access to internet and various things like that.
And could you tell us a little bit about, like how many people have gotten involved? You talked about how, it started in East Liberty and it's spread to, neighborhoods across the city. So how many people have the Stop the Station movement engaged up to this point, just even in a ballpark figure?
Okay. Our actual petition itself has like 2,000-ish signatures. I'd say like those are like the outside people, or not outside people, but those are like the people like who just support like our demands and stuff like that. And then there's like, I guess like a smaller, more consistent amount of people like actively engage within the movement and like support to help it grow. And I'd say that's around 200 strong. Like obviously not everyone can commit to the same times, but our meetings usually are between like 70 to like 100 people, and those are like a variety of people like who are able to come based on like what their schedule allows. And we usually have a pretty consistent volunteer base, so I'd say like at max like our strong base is like 200, but we do have like that larger support from the community. And I think most important, like these demands have really massive support from the community. I think that's what's necessary in order to like win these struggles.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for breaking all that down, Dakota. I just wanted to ask about, as was mentioned, I think at the beginning of this segment, the community action conference that you hosted over the weekend. So I just wanted to ask like what the specific focus of that was, some of the main topics of discussion and any key takeaways that came from that.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really amazing conversation. Like I loved it so much. Basically, the idea was, Stop the Station, one of our main demands is, creating a democratically, elected community control force that can like actively have, some role in like controlling the way in which police act within our communities, right? I think like this is like our most popular demand. I think around 85% of people who have like we've talked to support this demand. And I think even last year there's like a ballot measure to strengthen the current civilian review board a little bit. And that was like widely supported, widely voted in by like most people who voted, that year. And I think like that, like we already know like this is a popular demand. So the point of this action conference was to begin the fight to actually organize to create like the actualization of that demand, right? So that, the main way we want to do this is like we're fighting for like a democratic, thing. We want this fight to be democratic, so like that's why we had this action conference, because we want people to we want the people involved in this fight to be able to decide what they think, like this board should look like, what they think its power should be, how they think like the elections for people who are involved in it should happen. We had really amazing conversations about like, the various powers in which this board should have. Like, should, various groups allowed to be on it? I think like, and while we can't confidently say we've answered all of these questions, I think like we're making these steps towards doing that. And one really great part about the meeting is we had Jerry Dickinson, I'm sure most people both here and like listening know, who was like an activist within Pittsburgh and also a lawyer a law professor at Pitt, who is like working on this legislation with us, right, to like create this body. And he was here not only to like hear people talk about it, but also to like literally draft legislation based on what people wanted this body to look like. And I think like, I just think that's so beautiful. Like, I think like that's like peak democratization within a fight, like literally crafting the way in which like the goal of your fight based on how people want it to look. And I think it's just like really great. And it was amazing. Just like so many people contributed really great points. We talked about like community organizing, like the need for like people to talk to their neighbors and coworkers and their friends about like what they're fighting for, and like drawing those people into these struggles, and just like various things like that.
So just as like a quick follow-up regarding that democratically elected police review board that you're looking to create, are there any other key differences between this board that you're trying to create, or at least suggestions people have about that, versus the current civilian police review board that's in place now, or is it really just that that main stipulation that this one would be democratically elected?
Yeah, I mean, the current civilian review board was fought with an amazing, like really strong fight in the 90s, largely due to the reaction of, the brutal murder of Johnny Gamage, right? And like this want by the community to like actually have some sort of like control over the police. Unfortunately, due to like largely the attacks of like the city government and the FOP, the board has been watered down a lot. That doesn't mean like the people on it are horrible and like don't care or anything like that, but just like that their current state it is, they do not have the power, to really do much. Like, I think even recently, like one example that really stood out to me is like they, couldn't investigate a bunch of police who were drinking on the job, and spreaded corona to their coworkers, which made like, I think like 10% of the police force have to like take off, which is like ridiculous. Like that's not even like some like huge major complaint where like they attacked another citizen, but even then, they weren't willing to investigate it. And I think like that's why we really need like this board that has like a little more power. Our kind of ideas are like, not just like, this vague idea of like providing like community perspectives on police, but like actual power to like, set rules with how police act in communities, like be able to like fire police officers who do like these really harmful, dangerous things, which I think is like really important. And like, I think most importantly, we've been discussing maybe having some ability to like actually address the police budget with this body. And I think those ideas are still in discussion, but I think like that's really important. Like I said, the police budget is really grossly overinflated, and I think like, if this board is going to be democratic, I think most people will agree that like they don't want to have it like that. So yeah.
So thank you so much for wrapping that up and explaining the difference between the, appointing people to the police review boards and having them elected by the community. For people who are very interested in the work that you are doing, they want to get involved and support, what are some of the next steps that Stop the Station is working on, and how may they get in contact with you?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, our next steps are moving forward into like this fight for this democratically elected community control board of the police. Like we are planning to have another action conference tentatively on March 27th, though. Follow our socials. We're usually at Stop the Station PGH. I think we have a Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'm not sure if we have any more. But I think like that's just like a really great way to keep on track. If you want to get like directly involved, like volunteering and stuff like that, you can find our petition on either of those socials, and you should be able to definitely get emails about like volunteering opportunities and stuff like that. And yeah, like just doing those basic things I think can really help grow this movement. And like I said before, talking to your coworkers and friends and family and any organizations you're part of to help join this movement, I think is the essential thing that will help win this fight, just having as much support as possible. So yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, and good luck on all your organizing, and thank you for joining us on a school night, even though it's a lot going on. So I really appreciate you coming through.
Yeah, thank you.
And so, moving on, leaving Pittsburgh, going up to the street, we're going to be joined by Nino Brown, who is a teacher, an organizer, and an activist from the Boston area, who has been very influential in talking about issues of equality and racism, and had actual success that is now kind of being pushed back on. So to talk about what it's like to organize in a union support to win and get pushback, please welcome Nino Brown.
Peace, y'all. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, welcome.
Glad to be here. Happy Black History Month. My name is Nino Brown. Glad to be here with y'all. As I was saying, I organize with the Boston Teachers Union, many other organizations, Jericho Movement, a movement to free political prisoners, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, as well as a group called Reds and Ed. It's a socialist formation for teachers who are, revolutionary socialists in education. But I'm glad to be here with y'all. Kari, I don't know if you were about to open up or something.
No, I was just welcoming you to the show. Like, thank you for joining us.
Dig. All right, glad to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like Dakota was saying, over the summer, last year, there was a lot of organizing around police violence and equity and racism, and people, based on their communities and their affiliations, responded differently. How did the Boston Teachers Union respond? How was that process getting that resolution passed?
Yeah. Well, first I'll say, shout out to all the folks who are, struggling against police brutality to get justice. We know that the police are the thin blue line between us and the 1%, right? Actually, I have most of my time in Boston has been organizing against police brutality. I just want to uplift the names and the families of Usama Rahim, who's a Black Muslim who was killed by the FBI and the Boston Police Department some 3-4 years ago. Dennis Reynoso, Dominican-American man who was an Iraq War veteran, killed by the police in Lawrence in front of his son. Terrence Coleman and his family. Terrence Coleman was a 30-year-old Black man who was, his mother called for the ambulance, and the police showed up to his house and ended up killing him in front of his mother. So, that idea that Boston or Massachusetts is a liberal state, whatever that means, right? We have police brutality, we have racism and white supremacy here. So in the union, most people today are not in unions. And I think, what we're seeing with the Alabama workers and the Google workers, more people are getting hip to what unions are as a defense for us people who have to wake up and go work to survive, right? Understanding that we're working class organizations. So I think that's important, just because when I grew up, I didn't hear anything about unions. So I think it's always important to uplift unions. So the BTU, we're about 10,000 members. And, this past summer, there was an uprising of what they call Black Lives Matter rebellions, really rebellions against the austerity, against the rampant police brutality. And out of these rebellions, I was a part of a grouping of teachers that helped to put together a resolution within the union. We brought it to the union floor around anti-racism, right? Anti-racism became the buzzword, all of last year and probably into this year. Anti-racist teaching, anti-racist classroom, anti-racist curriculum, anti-racist fill in the blank, right? But as a union with 10,000 members, we're all dues paying. We have about, I think it's some $18 million in our budget every year from, our dues, right? And we're workers, right? We're Black, white, Latino, what have you. And as a multinational group, we saw that it was necessary to make a stand against racism, right? Given that we're in Boston. Just the school that I taught at last year and for the previous 3 years was named after a eugenicist, this guy, Oliver Wendell Holmes, right? He believed that Black people were subhuman, and the school's mostly Black and brown students, the place where we take our students, Codman Square, it was named after General Codman. He was a slave owner, and his slaves killed him. So they said, "Oh my God, poor General Codman. Let's name a square after him." So Boston's definitely has a deep history of racism. So going into the union and going into the union meeting, this is around June of last year, we raised a resolution that demanded that the union take a strong stance for the students who we teach and the families who we serve, right? And we recognize that Black Americans, are 3 times more likely to die from the coronavirus. I grew up hearing if white people have the cold, Black people have pneumonia, and white people have COVID now, and Black people are just dying left and right. And our resolution, it called for, I'm just going to read a part of it, that the BTU, we condemn the killing of George Floyd and the countless of other Black people who have been killed by police and white supremacists such as Breonna Taylor, Dontre Hamilton, Sandra Bland, Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin, Tony McDade, Ahmaud Arbery, Philando Castile, and of course in Boston, Terrence Coleman, Usama Rahim, Dennis Reynoso, Burrell Ramsey Wright. And we, as a union, we demanded and supported the arrest of Derek Chauvin, the murder of George Floyd, as well as the 3 other officers who were involved in his death, right? They watched this man be lynched on camera and did nothing, right? And we also called upon the Boston public school system to remove all police from the school system, right? To stop working with Boston Police Department, to stop working with ICE, to label our students as gang members, and actually deport some of them. There's been a handful of immigrant students who have faced deportation, if not prison or jail rather, because of alleged gang status, right? So we demanded that we have no more police in schools, and that the BTU demand that that BPS invest $4 million that we currently spend on Boston school police into mental health services and restorative justice practices in our schools, and also to provide at least 10 hours of anti-racist training to union members, as well as to support things like ethnic studies, of which I'm a part of. I was part of the Ethnic Studies Now committee, which is trying to bring ethnic studies to Boston public schools K through 12, right? So from 5 years old to 18, you have to know about who your people are, where you come from, and know about white supremacy. So there are many other things in this resolution, but the spirit of us raising this was that, like I said, the people, the communities we serve, the families we serve, the makeup of our union, right? If we think that the police are our friends because some teachers are married to police, some teachers are married to cops, and they spoke against the resolution, several times. In fact, one time they spoke against the resolution most recently, I think on George Floyd's birthday, right? So understanding that, it was a struggle within a struggle, I don't know if folks have questions. I don't want to go on and just rap for too long, but the stage that we're at is that we passed the resolution, but that's just words on a page. Now's the time to begin to organize to make the resolution come to life, and I can talk some about that stuff as well.
So I had a quick question. From a historical context, people my age, I think we're getting principal. I don't know. I think it went away. When I think about Boston education, so many people my age go back, to the late 70s, The very, very vicious school desegregation fight. So how far along, has Boston come, since then? Obviously, it has not been a full transformation because we're still, dealing, with these issues. But there, pushback from parents, pushback from other teachers, because we know that, while we know, much like Pittsburgh, Boston is in the north, but it is one of those northern cities that has a history, of having a close kinship to some of our southern cities that are much more associated with Jim Crow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like Malcolm X said, man, anything below the Canadian border is the South. Boston Public Schools, I think, was the last district to desegregate. And, today, actually, for the last 2-3 years, the Bay State Banner, the Boston Globe, have been running articles saying that segregation today in Boston Public Schools is worse than it was, actually 50 years ago. I'm 30 now. I'm about to turn 30. I keep thinking that 20 years ago is 1980, but it's not. But, we have anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 students in Boston Public Schools who are homeless. The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston found that the median wealth of a Black family is $8, right? $8. And this is the 21st century, right? The era that we're told, post 1990, Soviet Union's over, this is as good as it gets. So from my perspective, from what I've seen, every single year that I've been in Boston Public Schools, I have had homeless students. I have had students who are functionally illiterate in the 5th grade, who couldn't read See Spot Run, 10 years old, 11 years old, right? And this is just last year, 2019, 2020. I remember, they give us these large transparent bags from these nonprofits that provide toothpaste, clothes, basic necessities to students, and I mean, I can't etch that out of my memory of having 5 to 6 bags of just transparent stuff to hand to my students to take home, right? And of course, kids make fun of each other or whatever, right? But it's rough. The segregation that has not skipped a beat in Boston, I would say. Oh, some of the pushback with the teachers and parents, just to get to that. It's difficult, right? Because we know that the public school system, teachers have had a fraught history with Black parents. A lot of Black parents don't trust the education system. When I started teaching some 5-6 years ago, my paraprofessional, she was some 50, 60 years old or so. She was telling me stories about how when she would go into school and she would have to fist fight, not just the racists outside the school, but have to fight the teachers who are racist against them as well. And now she's my paraprofessional, right? So that shapes how parents are seeing, how schools reopen, because a lot of parents that go, served by public schools are poor, Black, working class, Latino people and Black people. And for them, the school converges so much, dental care, eye care, food, like I just said, giving kids, toothpaste and toothbrushes, right? Through these nonprofits. These nonprofits need to pay their taxes, so we don't need to ask them in the first place, but whatever, right? So parents, working class parents, they want the schools to open, not because they're right wingers, right? Not because they're Trumpites or whatever, right? It's because of racism and capitalism, right? They're so dependent on the school because of the poverty that's been imposed on them. And right now we've been trying to do a better job of, as a union, of telling our own narrative, right? Because the Boston Globe, the corporate press, they say, oh, teachers are lazy, they don't want to go back into schools. We're not saying that we don't want schools to open. We do want to work. We do want to go back. But we're not going back into a school that was built in 1855. We're not going back to a school that was built in 1867 and, COVID is walking straight through the window. When I went to my classroom, they told me to just open the window and that'll be enough ventilation to get COVID out of the room, right? So there's definitely been misinformation to parents, the history of racism that has them not trusting the system in general. And then we as teachers, we've been holding community forums to get the truth out there, that we do want to work, but we're not going to throw ourselves into the flame. We're not going to just go into an unsafe school and die because the city can't, cancel rents. The city can't provide, 3 meals a day to public school students and their families, right? But hopefully, that speaks to that.
Absolutely. Ryan, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask real quick, specifically about one of the stipulations mentioned on that resolution. It talked about, advocating for and continuing with sorry, y'all getting a lot of feedback. My fault.
I'm getting a little bit. Maybe Nino, if you mute your computer, that might be the issue.
Okay, yeah. Can y'all hear me now? Sorry about that. Okay, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to ask real quick about the inclusion done right. Or did I just get muted real quick? Did y'all hear that? Okay. Let me try that one more time. Yeah, I just wanted to ask real quick about the Inclusion Done Right campaign that's mentioned on that resolution. That it's talked about. Y'all wanted to emphasize continuing with that. So if you could just talk briefly about what that campaign is and what it aims to achieve.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just for some context, the resolution was definitely a collaborative and a collective effort. And I teach special education, and I have some some knowledge and expertise. But essentially, right, that campaign really is to focus on that students of color, particularly young black boys, have been underserved, right, by the special education system in Massachusetts, right, where we have teachers who are double licensed up, where I teach myself, where we get our special education license, moderate disabilities, we get our general teaching license, and it makes you seem like you're a sexy, attractive teacher, right, on the market, right? But the caveat is that we have a lot of teachers who are now, because of these certifications and licensures, the district is using that as a way to just pile immense amount of work onto teachers, just because you have more licenses, right? Just because you have more degrees, right? What we're demanding is that in order to do inclusion done right, we need teachers who are licensed, but we also need paraprofessionals in the room as well, so that teachers can actually serve our students, right? Because I'll say for myself, when I had some 25 to almost 30 students, right, and students who are struggling with reading, in fifth grade, reading on the first grade, second grade level in fifth grade, right, because of all these degrees, or not even degrees in my sense, but licensures and certifications, it's a justification to overwork you, right? So when we say we need to do inclusion done right, we say that we need to have essentially a fully funded public school system, right, where teachers who are trained and have experience in things like de-escalation, on top of a more inclusive curriculum, talked about ethnic studies, so that students can really learn in what they call the least restrictive setting possible, right? You can't learn in a class of 30 people where 10 kids are reading on grade level, 5 kids can't read, the other 10 kids, are on first, second grade level. It's unsustainable, and it's like they say, you're headed for self-destruction. It's a setup in that sense. So we want inclusion done right by fully funding the schools, right? Defund the police, fund the schools. It's not rocket science. For those of us who are teaching and serving working class communities.
All right. Well, thank you for that and for sharing that information with us. A lot of times we think about the wins, but they forget to think about back and how to organize after and what comes after you've galvanized like a multicultural coalition. So we want to thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing what the Boston Teachers Union is going to do and what this new inclusion looks like if you're able to get a lot of these demands met. So thank you so much for joining us.
Right on. Peace.
All right. So one of these days we'll get to an hour. we're going back.
A miracle. Don't lie to them. They know the
we love our guests, and we love like learning so much about the work that they're doing and how we can support. And one of the reasons why is we hear stories, and a lot of times we sometimes feel powerless about what we can do, how we can support, how we can engage and mobilize. And our next guest, who is Executive Director María del Rosario, is joining us because in January, there was an explosion at a poultry factory here in Gainesville, Georgia, where 6 individuals lost their lives. They died due to safety issues at the factory. Gainesville is a place where it's one of the largest areas where people who are undocumented and moving through the immigration system live and reside. And as a result, there is a lot of pressure from employers who partner with ICE to make sure that when there are issues of safety, that a lot of organizing does not happen. So how we're seeing things happen in Alabama, it's happening also in Gainesville, and people's lives are being held in the balance. And so to talk about the explosion, to talk about the statewide table and the demands of elected officials, we welcome Executive Director María. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey everyone, pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I think Executive Director is quite a fancy title. It's really a group of us doing a lot of work collaboratively. So I'm really excited to be here on and these circumstances, some forms of liberation.
We have a little bit of a delay.
No.
audio issues right now.
I have a little bit of a audio issue. Hopefully, we'll be able to bring María on and figure out, what was going on. But America, you can talk a little bit about, what you know about, what was going on, down in Gainesville while we bring María back on.
So while we wait for María, like I was saying, there were 6 people, workers who lost their lives. And that was Jose De Jesus, Corey Allen Murphy, Nelly Perez Raphael, Suelo Suarez Bernal, Victor Velez, and Edgar Vera Garcia. They went to work and doing what you would expect to happen at work is working. And there was a factory explosion. And because of the fact on residency and workers visas, there has been a lot of pushback and threats to say that if you are organizing, we're going to push back. And so there have been a lot of people who've been every day going down to the Gainesville area to help organize and mobilize folks so they can join in and let people know that what's going on, people know they have labor rights as workers in the United States. So some of the issues, of course, are traditional safety issues, that safety procedures are outdated, that inspections aren't happening as soon as they need to be, that people do not have the necessary PPE to do their jobs, and that people are just being exploited for labor. And I think we do have a slide that John is going to pull in. And María, I think María is actually going to join us back now, just like to talk about what it has been like to organize over the past few weeks. So I think we have you back.
Yes, you hear me? Can you hear me? No.
I think
Can
we're
you
still
hear
having
me?
the same issue.
So weird. Take off.
Yeah,
Could
but
possibly be the
while we wait
headphones.
for Maria to
Sometimes
come
headphones work, sometimes they don't.
back, they're like, it's like listen, this is what we're doing in the time of COVID. That's why we're having these conversations, because it's very hard to organize with technology. Technology fails. That the internet is not always as strong in some areas as it is in others. But John, can you pull up the infographic that we had sent over to us, talking about some of the ways people can get involved? But if you are in the Georgia area, the Metro Atlanta area, and you are someone who is bilingual, they need people to go down to Gainesville in shifts to talk about various issues with local residents. So they can do surveys to make sure that people are safe, to help with assistance, to make sure that people are not being harmed or threatened anyway. And in response to everything that happened, there's been a statewide table of unions, human rights organizations, and coalitions that have formed a statewide table to actually demand that elected officials pass legislation that would improve workers' rights, regardless of citizenship, regardless of ethnicity, because it's very important to understand that working class, Black and Brown people, regardless of their background, have a right to go to work and come home and return, and shouldn't be forced to work in deplorable and unsafe living conditions. So this is similar to what we're seeing all across the country. Again, Alabama has been organizing. Here in Pennsylvania, people have also been organizing, such as at Planned Parenthood, to make sure that the working conditions are safe and people are able to live and thrive. And so that's why it's very important. And then we're just trying to make sure that people are able to, that Maria can come back in. But if not, we'll have Maria come back on another show, just because this is a very important topic. But while we wait for her, the Georgia Familias Unidas, I do apologize, I'm butchering the language. They need canvassers, they need drivers, they need flyers, droppers, and remote support. You can email them at jas@gafu.org for folks to go out and volunteer, because there are providing resources. And again, this is a chemical leak, so people need to make sure that they are safe in every way possible. And so that's why they're out still organizing, because again, similarly how we've had to deal with here in Pennsylvania with the exposures and the fire that happened out in Clairton. Sometimes you don't know what's happening. The information is put out slowly. And so it's very important that we have people who are able to go out and engage. So we're going to bring Maria back, and we're going to hope that this third time is the charm.
Hey, can y'all hear me now?
Yes.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Great. Well, thank y'all so much for having me. You gave a lot of great highlights of what we're doing in Gainesville, Georgia. So a little bit about me. I am María de Rosario Palacios. My pronouns are she, they, ella. I grew up in Gainesville, Georgia. We moved in 1994 when I was 5 years old, because my parents wanted to move into the industry after working as migrant farm workers. An uncle of ours recruited my parents to come work, and we learned, and they still to this day give folks about $600 for signing someone on if they stay on for longer than 3 months. So Gainesville is known as the poultry capital of the world. And Gainesville's pretty unique. Growing up in Gainesville, it's a population that's 41% Hispanic. It's 21% Black, and there's 3% Vietnamese Americans in the city. So it's, majority people of color. It's a beautiful city. It has a lot of issues though, because policing is an issue there, with our sheriff's office choosing to opt into 287G, which is an optional federal program. And the reason I bring that up is because Gainesville actually uniquely has the highest per capita of undocumented immigrants for its immigrant population. Not any other country, not any other city near border states, actually in Georgia, and it's in Northeast Georgia, it's in Gainesville. So we have been doing mutual aid work. Georgia Familias Unidas is a group of a lot of volunteers, and we work in collaboratives to try to bring resources to folks, especially with hotspot as an issue that it is. So we've been doing a lot of work since July of last year to try to get resources, financial assistance, PPE, because you do not get free PPE provided at the poultry plants. And so unfortunately there was a nitrogen leak that took the lives of 6 of our folks. And I know they were mentioned earlier, but I think it's always important to recognize that Jose de Jesus, Nelly, Saulo, Victor, Edgar, Corey definitely did not know that they were exposing themselves more than they already do on a daily basis with COVID-19. And so it was an unfortunate incident that we've been responding to, and we have now over 30 organizations, most of which are statewide immigrant rights organizations, a lot of national groups like Southern Poverty Law Center, NILC, and some unions like the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement, who've been helping us out do our outreach efforts. And we're trying to push for protections and for long-term changes too for our community in town.
And then I think you talked about explaining the makeup of Gainesville. I know there was a report that was just released talking about how the police and ICE are for lack of better words, intimidating some of the workers from speaking out. Can you explain more about what is happening on the ground, and also talk about this legislation demand to make the factory safer?
Yes. So as a collaborative, we've sent 3 different demands. There's, a couple of federal agencies. One is the Chemical Hazard Safety Board, CSB, which there was a report released at, I think, Friday, on their collaboration with the Sheriff's Office and with ICE, right? So the Sheriff's Office, like I said, chooses to opt into a federal program where they're doubling their deputies as ICE agents and can process folks for immigration violations, right, which are civil violations, but that's the case. And so the Chemical Safety Board has been running its entire investigation under the Sheriff's Office. And POGO released a lot of findings that they had been in contact with ICE officers throughout their investigations. And so what would happen is folks oftentimes who needed medical attention were told that they had to go into the plant in order to be, quote unquote, evaluated, to be cleared for, medical assistance. And I'm talking about folks who were having itchy throats, having trouble breathing, having trouble even seeing. And those issues had persisted since the accident. And even before the accident, a couple of days prior, many folks were complaining about a really large smell of ammonia that was giving them headaches. And so then what was happening is we were getting reports that when they went in, atypical questions were being asked, like, what's your nationality? What other aliases have you used? How long have you been in this country? How long have you lived in Gainesville? What other places have you worked at, right? These are questions that are atypical for any of the federal agencies that are involved, and definitely atypical for the insurance adjuster who's, doing workers' comp. But nonetheless, that happened, and folks were told to sign documents in English, knowing that they're monolingual Spanish speakers, first of all, mostly, but even literacy rates, right? Not everyone is literate. And so it's been a gross serving of injustice, and our folks have been reaching out daily to help us out. We're in contact with over 80 workers of the ones that were there that morning that the accident happened.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to talk a little bit about, so, throughout the entire COVID pandemic, the poultry and meat processing industry has, pretty constantly been under the spotlight, as far as having a lot of issues and, potential negligence as far as, how they're continuing to operate their plants, with tens of thousands of workers contracting COVID, and, deaths in the hundreds. So, between, all of the shortcomings with safety and things like that have been brought to light with COVID, combined with, I read a report the other day that someone from, I believe the gas company is Messer, had actually come a day or two prior to inspect and run maintenance on that liquid nitrogen system that then had the leak a day or two later. So there's clearly a lot of different issues with just general safety really in the workplace in this industry, that have been brought to light by COVID and incidents like this. So, I mean, what are some of the real major foundational reforms that need to take place, for that type of safety to be properly enforced and upheld in the workplace?
It's really sad. Last year when we had announced a national emergency to combat COVID, to, curtail what was happening in April of last year, Congressman Doug Collins, who later ran for the Senate seat that against Loeffler, he decided that it was a great idea to propose a federal legislation that would speed up belt lines in the poultry industry to speeds that had not been done since before there was major labor reforms in this country. And so that passed in April of last year, and that has not been repealed. So one, if you can imagine shortages of workers who are contracting COVID-19 and you decide to speed up the belt lines, you're definitely exhausting folks physically. But the fact that this is an inhalable exposure and you're working elbow to elbow, I used to work in the industry myself right out of high school. I worked for a couple years and I worked for Smithfield for a couple more. And my parents have worked there. My mother, worked there for 20 years. You're elbow to elbow with folks. Plexiglass hasn't even been implemented at the peak, at the best COVID regulations that they had adjusted. Like you were maybe still 3 feet, within each other, and that's at one given time. As you're moving, as you're having to pass on to the next, part of the assembly line, there's not any protections. And then PPE isn't even being handed out, right? So I know there was a report released the 10th of this month, that, the 17th of this month, so it's just days ago, where leading experts were calling, for addressing inhalation exposure. And I can tell you firsthand, poultry plant workers don't even get the 3-ply disposable face masks. So, a lot of leading experts are calling for N95s because of how they're inhaling that. So one, we should have reform on that simple fact of hey, let's provide the PPE that are required, that federal agencies require, even USDA. USDA requires beards, hair nets, right? Beard nets, different kinds of things like that. That is taken out of folks' paycheck. And then secondly, disability insurance on a statewide level. Disability insurance, if the plant actually covers you, will only cover you for 2 weeks. And after that, you have to prove why your sickness prevents you from doing your day-to-day tasks. There is no restrictions on the fact that you're exposing other folks to a deadly virus that has taken the lives of Black and brown folks. There's no consideration for that, and there's no changes to disability policies. So in the case of my mother, who became exposed at work from a coworker who was falling over after having been out for 2 weeks, she tested positive the same day that her coworker passed away. Because he had to return to work because he was going to lose his job. His 2 weeks were up and he had not recovered from COVID, and then exposed a large amount of folks, including my mother, who went through a really, really serious case of it. So, reforms like that, statewide level, on a federal level. We do have an ally, Representative B. Wynn, who introduced actually just today House Bill 549. So she introduced that today to call attention to something that often happens even in non-COVID times, which is sexual harassment. But that includes a lot of harassment in general when, you're a whistleblower telling these agencies of the grotesque day-to-day practices of the plants. And so 549 goes even way beyond that. And I think that's a really great measure that has bipartisan support in the state of Georgia. So I would love to see that happen.
And I know you were talking about there's a complexity of so many issues, and it all kind of like is at the intersection of workers' rights and immigration rights. So what are some of the things that you need for people to be supported? I know you are requesting people to volunteer to come down to Gainesville, particularly people who speak Spanish. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so we've been hosting weekly events. At the beginning, we were doing them twice a week. And so what we do is we have gathered a lot of donations. Over 1,500 people have donated to a GoFundMe because, for the last 3 weeks, workers were not told that they weren't going to get paid for being out. And when you're making $300 to $400 a week, you're barely making it to rent. You're barely you're covering your costs. So we actually pulled together to give out direct financial assistance. And we're going to do that again this weekend, thanks to the, donations of grassroots donors and also, some of the organizations like Southern Poverty Law Center, New Georgia Project, have all given donations. And so we need folks to come to help us because we have to survey folks. We have to make sure that we keep records on our end. And then though we've been getting a lot of folks that we would have to drive to the hospital. We drove 20 folks to the hospital in like a 10-day span, and we had to help them even talk through what they're experiencing, because shared language is important, but when your translators are folks who learn Spanish and speak like technical medical Spanish, and you're talking to folks who even Spanish is a second language because they speak indigenous tongues, shared language is a thing. So we need real life folks that are bilingual that can help navigate through that. But also we've been running Know Your Rights clinics, immigration clinics. And so we, logistically, we always need support to make sure that we're not, we're practicing social distance and we're really assessing folks' needs. So that's helpful. And even for folks who don't speak Spanish, because we've been exercising a lot of security measures out of fear that, folks might be followed, we discourage folks from driving to the event that don't have a license, but some people still do. So we make sure that there's not, a magical roadblock, 300 yards from where we're at too. So we have folks like surveilling to make sure our people aren't being harassed. And so there's always a lot of need. But aside from that, we've been doing campaigns on social media to get more awareness, to fundraise. But we have some long-term hopes too on a federal level, on a statewide level. And so we always need people for that. Graphic designers, especially. You can be remote. We really, really need graphic designers. So if there's folks out there hearing us that can do that, I'd love to get you plugged in like today or maybe tomorrow, whenever you're free.
And I just had a quick question. Over the last several months, Georgia has been, the center of the political universe, for a variety of reasons. And I'm just curious, just from a political standpoint, how did the general election in November and then the runoff election, if any way, affect the work that you did with, the accusations? Did some of that spill over, into anti-immigrant bigotry, around like fake voters and things like that? Did that somehow in any way like impact the landscape around the work that you were doing and the people in the communities that you're working in?
Completely. I worked in the immigrant rights space since 2012. And you're usually on the defense in Georgia, right, against crazy anti-immigrant legislation. I mean, one year we defeated 14 anti-immigrant legislation in a matter of 3 months, some that were run by who was then the lieutenant governor. And so the landscape is very much different, because you also had the issue of the women who had, just grotesque mutilations to their body with hysterectomies that were not done by consent. And you have folks like Project South, GLAR, raising that issue, and elected officials started going on the record on where they stand on immigrant rights and really human rights violations that are so closely tied to a system that is not kept in check, a system that is run by, private corporations, as we know. We know Biden has eliminated that for prisons, but not for detention centers. And so, this past year really set the groundwork for starting to hold accountable elected officials. So we know now who's with us and who's not with us. Much more on the record, and we have much more, proactive candidates and elected officials. And you have allies like Representative Bee Nguyen, who has championed immigrant rights since she was first elected, even before she was elected to office. So it's great to see that, and it's great to see a pro-worker agenda, which I think is going to happen more and more because it's so closely tied to immigrant rights. Again, we've glamorized essential workers. We say their labor is essential, but their immigration status has yet to become essential, right? So I am happy that we've moved forward in that direction, that we have now U.S. senators who will listen to us, and we know who they're watching, and we know they care. We know they're in contact with OSHA, things of that nature. So that's a refreshing change. I can promise you that.
And then we're gonna pull up the graphics again. Outside of like financial support, which is like always needed, can you just talk again about some of the ways that people can volunteer with your organization?
Yes, if you want to do so remotely, like I said, we're in desperate need of graphic designers. Even if your skills are only on Canva, which is actually the platform that we use, we would love to have your time. If you do want to donate, of course, Cash App and PayPal are the donations that are the quickest to get that, besides a paper check. You can always email us at hello@goffley.org to get our address for that. And we have in-person events. Every week we're doing either a Know Your Rights clinic that has like financial assistance. This past Saturday, a few days ago, we did a food bank, and we actually drove to folks because, again, the majority of folks rely on taxis for transportation to work. And so this past weekend, we drove to 42 houses, and we were able to help 115 families with over 50 pounds of food. So we were really glad that happened, and it happened because of small donations and some large ones. And so we'll take you at any capacity that you have. Believe me, we have Signal chats. We'll get you in there tonight if you're ready. So reach out to us.
That's awesome. Ron, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick. I was looking at Twitter the other day, and I saw this really good graphic about workers knowing their rights as they return to work. Like a lot of points of emphasis for that, as far as what they have the right to do, what employers don't have the right to do. So if there was any of those things that you wanted to specifically emphasize or let people know about real quick.
Yeah, that's really important because like I said, there's been atypical interviews done and surveys. And so it is important to know that definitely I'm not an attorney, but we've been making sure that the attorneys that work with us that do labor and employment law are giving talking points. One of the biggest thing is, questions about your nationality, questions about, where you've resided, that have nothing to do with work. Those are not questions that you have to answer. And so for folks hearing us, when you get in those kinds of positions, you're always able to say, like, I'm not comfortable answering. You're always able to, stay silent, to exercise, right, that Fifth Amendment right, even with employers. And another thing is you don't have to face retaliation or intimidation because you spoke to an agency like OSHA. OSHA has been working closely with us. They've been listening to our advice. We've told them our concerns from the very beginning. And, you know, OSHA is not going to report your stuff to ICE. You know, we don't know about these other these other agencies, as the reports have shown. But we've been making sure that we vet folks who are interviewing folks and told them, like, hey, the plant is doing really weird interviews. And we've told our folks that they don't need to do any interviews there. So if you want to speak to folks, you know, go outside of the plant. And so you do have that right to ask OSHA to interview you outside of your workplace, you know, because it can be really uncomfortable and you're not going to fully tell what you need to say. Another thing too is, you know, documenting as much as possible what kind of symptoms you're experiencing, what kind of issues. A lot of folks didn't realize that they were having serious like chest pain, didn't realize folks who never experienced like high blood pressure issues before. And after this, you know, are having it. Writing down those symptoms that you may think are not a big deal, they could become a big deal over time. That's important because if you do have to open a workers' comp case or another kind of case, not just because, you know, you're out here trying to sue folks. No, it's for your own health and medical protections, right? You need to start documenting when it happened, because if it's tied to this work injury, that's going to be crucial, and telling other folks about it too. So we've been trying to teach our folks, and then, you know, don't sign anything that you don't, you know, you haven't read fully, you don't fully understand. Ask to take a picture if they don't want to make a copy of it. And also we've been telling folks, ask to take it home and say, like, I'm going to take this home. Can I bring it back to you tomorrow? So those are some tips that we've been giving our folks.
Yeah, so I do thank you for staying on with us and working through the technical difficulties. There's everything we can do in the future. Please do not hesitate to reach out. I'll probably email you. We'll link you with some graphic designers and artists after this. So hopefully they can be of some assistance to you as well. But with that, as we're wrapping up, is there any last words that you want to say? Anything that, I know it's such a pressing issue and we didn't get to cover everything, but is there anything that you want to make sure you're able to say before you leave?
I just always like to remind folks that we're so closely tied to each other. And even if you've never worked inside the poultry plant, even if you don't know, you know, what it's like to work under 40-degree weather, you know, and to experience what folks are experiencing, I think there's a lot of shared vulnerabilities and shared, you know, experiences around the exposure of COVID-19 and the systematic construction of healthcare systems, of, you know, these labor forces that prefer capitalism every single time over human life. And, you know, a lot of folks don't know Nellie and Edgar, who was the youngest person who passed away, they share a daughter who is 3 years old. And so if anything, if you can imagine, because at this point, our poultry plant workers know they're exposing themselves at work to COVID-19. It's so prevalent in our community. But can you imagine not knowing that that day you were going to leave your 3-year-old daughter without any parents? And I think those are the things we need to remember, that these are real lives. These are human beings, just like you and I. You know, our immigration status, that's a whole nother topic for the Biden administration, right? We need him to do some stuff there. But we need to remember that, you know, their daughter, their 3-year-old, shouldn't be going through what they're going through, and the lives of everyone else. And it's traumatic too, you know, to witness 5 folks. And it wasn't 5 folks at one single time. It wasn't like 5 instantly passed. It was Edgar, and then minutes later, someone else, and then minutes later, someone else, and then minutes later, you know, till you reach the 5th person, and then the 6th person passed away in the hospital. So it's really unfortunate, and this is a time for us all to come together, whether we're attorneys or social media graphic designers who taught themselves. We need y'all, because we're going to try to push for some long-term changes here.
All right. Well, I do thank you so much, and you can feel free to stop your camera anytime. So again, we want to thank all of our guests for this evening. And again, we talked about organizing and mobilizing during the time of COVID, because it is Black and Brown communities who are, feeling the impacts in a variety of ways. But I think that with all of our guests, we saw there was a common thread of community and of mutual aid and of showing up for each other and having these multicultural coalitions. And that's how people are really supporting and organizing to make changes for their communities.
Yeah, definitely. Tonight was very powerful. I want to thank all three guests that joined us tonight. Dakota, Castro-Jarrett from Stop the Stages, María del Rosario Palacios from Georgia Familias, Unidas, acting executive director of that organization, and Nino Brown, not from the Cash Money Brothers crew, but from the Boston Teachers Union. I had to throw that one in there, man. It was too. It was just, it was like a hanging curveball.
I mean, at the end of the day, we're still like a media, or New Jack City, right? Like, we're still a media organization. And y'all ready? Here we go. The same as every week. So, first of all, register to vote. If you are someone who believes in electoral politics, we have a lot of stuff on the ballot for our May primary. Register to vote. If you're tuning in to One Hood, we do a variety of programming almost like every single day. So tomorrow, Tuesday at 2:00, we're doing what Black Pittsburgh needs to know about race and work. We have a lineup of folks that are going to talk about various issues, because we know economic policies are something that is very integral to our success and our safety. And there's a variety of ways that we are showing up and supporting each other. Tomorrow evening around 5:30, the Allegheny County Homer S. Brown Division is basically honoring Jasiri and One Hood Media for a lot of the work that we're doing. So that program is at 5:30. If you register, you go onto the Allegheny County Bar Association platform to register for that program tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. On Wednesday, we have This Week in White Supremacy, Wednesday at 6:00. And on Thursday, we have On Tilt, talking about, the state of mental health in America. And because it is the last Saturday, this Black History Month, we're wrapping it up with the Next Level Poetry Slam, talking about how you view and what does Black History Month mean to you. And that is going to be Saturday at 6:00. If you want to compete, the top prize is $250. You can reach out to Trouble NOS and sign up that way. But we have a lot of events every day coming. We also want to give our condolences to Pretty Pitts, who, son was taken, the gun violence over the weekend, and we want to just share our condolences, our thoughts and prayers for the family. We also want to give our condolences to our First Lady Celeste, who was also grieving the loss of a family member this weekend. So her and Jasiri are going to be offline for a couple of days as they grieve as a family. And we want to, again, just remind people to show love and to grace to each other, because a lot of people are going through a lot of things, and the way we show up and love is through mutual aid and solidarity. And with that, back to you, Kahari.
Kahari, you're on mute.
Ladies and gentlemen, sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to again just thank our guests one last time: Dakota, Castro-Jarrett from Stop the Station, María del Rosario Palacios from Georgia Familias, Unidas, and Nino Brown from the Boston Teachers Union. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and those who will be watching on the replay as well. Always shouts out to producer John for making it all happen. And on behalf of my colleagues, Ryan White and Miracle Jones, I am Kahari Mosley, thanking you for joining us once again for the One Hood Power Hour. Until next Monday at 7, stay engaged, stay involved, and most importantly, stay safe. Thank you. Good night.